Hello everyone, Sientir here with another Rambler for you, and today I'm going to kind of do, in many regards, what's kind of a part 2 to what I started talking about last time. So last time I talked about basically my life story, but experience that I had in real life that's had a big impact on me, that's kind of formed who I am now. And there's another aspect to this, which is the life that I've had from interaction with media. So video games, movies, books, all of these things have had an impact on me. And today, I'm going to talk about some of those. So there's definitely a lot of aesthetic impact that's happened to me because of video games in particular. One of the things that I want to talk about, actually, is not specific video games, but just kind of the concept of what it's like to play a video game. For those who have not really spent a whole lot of time doing so, one of the things that's most interesting to me, in some regard psychologically, about playing a video game is the aspect of inhabiting. And what I mean by that is video games are an active sort of experience. Movies and books, these are all kind of consumptive experiences. Books, to some extent, you're part of because it's activating the imagination in a way that's different than movies. Movies, while I think that they have a lot of value, or TV for that matter, but sort of that type of media, is very, what's the right phrase? There's a lot that's kind of just presented to you, and there's a lot that you can learn from analysis, and there's a lot that you can pick up. For example, I really like the Lord of the Rings movies. Star Wars has a very interesting sort of world, that sort of stuff. But the power of a book is sort of the way that it can pull you to places and excites and enervates the imagination, which I think is very powerful. Video games have a different sort of structure to them, where it's very much so about inhabiting a place. The thing that you get with video games that you don't get with the others is agency. You, as the player, have the agency to make decisions, and because of this, it means that, to some extent, you actually live in that world. You live in that digital world. You are in that place. And this has definitely been a case for me where I have memories of the things that I did in games. These are things that really happened. These are places I've been. They might be digital, but in many senses, they are real. This is, I think, something that's very interesting about video games that's somewhat unique. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive into sort of that video game angle. There's a couple of games that particularly stand out to me, kind of in different eras. So there's sort of the, I'm going to call it the early era, which would be things like Pokemon, early enough Pokemon, up through like Gen 3, Gen 2, something like that. So like the first, 9 Pokemon games or whatever you want to classify it as. Then there's also early FPSs with Doom and Quake, in particular those two, as well as Hexen and Heretic. Hexen and Heretic are very interesting in that so Doom is much more sci-fi, but this is one of the things that I really like about some of those early id Software FPSs, and Heretic and Hexen were kind of published by them, so they kind of fall into that same area. But Doom and Quake in particular were a blend of fantasy and sci-fi that I think was really interesting. Doom, the basic idea of being a space marine fighting demons because a portal to hell's been opened, and that is very, very interesting. Speaking actually, kind of as an aside, there are, believe it or not, 4 books based on Doom that were written. They're fairly old at this point, and they are a serious trip because you can tell that by the end of the second book, the author has like scraped the barrel so thin you can see through it. And then there's 2 more books. There are 4 of them, and it just goes completely off the deep end, where like what happened in Doom was the result of a literary war or something like that. I don't remember the details anymore, but they're a seriously strange read if you ever have the opportunity to do so. Anyway, getting back to kind of my point here. Hexen in particular, though, has had a strong sort of impact on certain aesthetics that I really like. In particular, sort of the foggy, swampy area, for any of those who are familiar with that game, is something that I find to be a very neat aesthetic, a very interesting aesthetic. And there's some stuff from Heretic, too, that I found really interesting, from like bright colors and heavily saturated colors. One of the things that I'm drawn to is heavily saturated colors. So those early games had definitely an impact on me. The Pokemon games are super nostalgic. It's an interesting thing kind of going through that world, experiencing what they did in it. I'm blown away by what they're managing to get out of the Game Boy Color with Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, because I spent some time when I was in college trying to program an emulator, but trying to program the Game Boy Color, and it is not easy. It is not very powerful, but they squeezed every ounce they could out of that thing and then some. So that sort of era had a lot of its impact was sort of aesthetic and feel and kind of building sort of the foundations. And then there comes kind of the next era, which is the Guild Wars era, I think. Guild Wars 1 in particular. So on this channel, or my YouTube channel, Voidonic Sientir, youtube.com/user/Voidonic Sientir, VOIDONICSIENTIR. I have a series I do called VOD of Consciousness. Most of my other stuff has links, roundup links to it. And I'm playing Guild Wars 1 in that, so it's not like my love for Guild Wars 1 has gone away. But Guild Wars 1 has been an incredibly impactful game on me. I've played it a lot. I really enjoyed my interactions with the guilds that I had in there from when the game was more actively being played by people. There's still people there, but it's not quite the same as it was back in the heyday of 2005 to about 2008 or so. And I spent a lot of time in that game. That was a phenomenal experience. And there's a lot from aesthetics, but also design stuff that I really learned a lot from in that game. And it's really been part of what I would consider a pillar in terms of what I want from gameplay. Because there's a ton of customization, a ton of flexibility. They have a beautiful system of restraints and possibilities and flexibility and experimentation that I absolutely love. And it's something that I love about Magic the Gathering. It's something that I've really enjoyed about MechWarrior 4. MechWarrior 4 Vengeance was a game that I really enjoyed playing. Then there's kind of the Dark Souls era, which is kind of the more recent one. Dark Souls is a game that's had a huge impact on what I want from action. So if Guild Wars 1 defines what I want from gameplay in terms of builds and team composition and skills and that sort of thing, Dark Souls 1 informs what I want from a gameplay standpoint. And it's also very informative about what I want from a lore standpoint as well. Because one of the things that I think is most impressive lore-wise about the Dark Souls games is they have made not only a very solid action game, but also an archaeological game. It is a game about doing archaeological investigation to try to piece together the history of the world. And I think that that is very fascinating. I'm very impressed that they did that. And I like how they put all of that together and present the lore in the game. There's a lot there from that aspect and from the aspect of how the community is built up around it that I find to be really fascinating. Like, people have been able to some extent, put together careers around the lore of those games, of the games that From Software's made in that sort of Dark Souls and Bloodborne series. And that it's so meaningful to people that that's possible is incredible to me. And then I need to also mention StarCraft 1 and Warcraft 3, or StarCraft Brood War if you want to call it. Because StarCraft Brood War I really got into modding, and this was an area where I could flex my game design muscles and start getting experience with it. Start trying to see, how do I make things that are balanced and good and interesting. And then Warcraft 3's map editor was also tremendous for exploring game design and seeing what I could do and how to use tools to kind of accomplish things that I wanted to do. And both of those were really important for kind of shaping things that way and for helping me understand using tools to create experiences, to create things that I enjoyed interacting with. But that's kind of, I think, enough about the video game angle for now. So I've also mentioned movies and books. When I think of books in particular, what I think of is the Verkozigan Saga. This is a series, for those unfamiliar with it, that's a sci-fi series, but there's not aliens. To some extent, there's been some genetic manipulation of human beings that's kind of made some a little bit alien, but the alienness comes from cultural differences. This series has kind of defined what I want from sci-fi and how I think about sci-fi. It's by Louise McMaster Bejeweled, if I've gotten her name in the right order. I highly recommend it. It's had a huge impact on how I think about storytelling as well. The basic overview of what I really appreciate about it is the way that it examines culture and its interaction with technology, its interaction with other cultures, and the way culture develops and changes over time, and the way that people develop and change over time. It is a book series that delights in moving forward, of not staying static, of not having a status quo. And that makes it very lifelike. So it's had a huge impact on how I think of stuff that way, as well as how I think of sci-fi settings. One of the things that they did in particular is have space stations be very important. This is something that I really have enjoyed. And actually, just kind of speaking on that and tangenting back into video games for a moment, Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet. Actually, that's a game I quite enjoyed, but one of the things I like about it is the structure where it's a sci-fi exploration game where you have traveling between places through space on the R-Wing. That's an idea that I'd like to see explored more fully nowadays, when a lot of those sorts of games are more open, typically. When you get space travel in a video game, Mass Effect, that series kind of plays in that space, and I'd like to see more stuff kind of play in that area, feeling a little bit more Legend of Zelda and less RPG, if that makes sense. I do quite like the Legend of Zelda series, by the way. I've played most of those. I don't enjoy the first or second one, but, that's how things go. So moving back into books, I've also enjoyed the Justin Files quite a bit. And that series was quite enjoyable. I also enjoyed Codex Alara. I don't tend to read a whole lot of books, so I spend a lot of time reading my Bible. That's the main book that I kind of read regularly. It's one of those things where I really enjoy reading my Bible. I feel like I get a lot out of it. It's kind of interesting to say, but I do enjoy spending a bit of time each day sitting down and reading through it, or most days anyway, and reading just a little bit more each day and thinking about what's going on in it and that sort of thing. The Bible probably has had some of the biggest impact on my life out of any sort of media I've consumed. Actually, there's been a number of things from anime stuff that has had an impact on me as well. I like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, of course. It's a fairly popular series, but that's a story that moves forward really well and has a lot of interesting development. But it's actually Overlord. So that series is about an MMO ending, and one of the people, like the last people on, that's playing the game, is an online game, right, ends up sort of trapped in the world as it turns real. So he's super powerful, playing kind of an undead lich sort of character. And the thing that's so impactful to me about it was that it did a very good job of conveying the concept of name to me. Name is one of those ideas that comes up in the Bible a lot. But this show is something that really helped me understand the concept, because one of the things that's happening is this main character wants his name spread throughout the world, but he's very particular and he wants to make sure he's protecting what that name means to people when they hear it. And that, I think, is very good explanation of why God cares about his name, is what do people think when they hear the name of Jesus. There's other stuff too, like I think of the storytelling in Tales of Symphonia, where there's an early scene that I remember is like, watch it 5 times, and each time a new layer is uncovered about what's actually being talked about, where it's like, oh, I thought they were talking about this, but now I see they're really talking about this. But it takes such an intimate knowledge of what's going on in the overall plot of that very long game to understand that. So I don't have time to go over all of the games and books and movies. I definitely feel that games overall have had some of the bigger impacts on me because, like I said, it's the experience of living in a place and interacting with the place and getting to see different logics in action. That's one of the things that's really cool about video games, is you can set up a different logic to how the world works and have that impact on how the player interacts with things because they're working with the logic of how that world works. And I really appreciate that. That's something that's a really neat thing about video games, because they're a lived experience. And it's an opportunity to go into a place and discover someplace new. I've enjoyed my time spent in Tyria. I've enjoyed my time spent in Hyrule, in the Mushroom Kingdom, or wherever else some of those Mario games that I've played have taken place. I don't know, inside paintings. And I've enjoyed my time spent in the various Sonic zones. I've enjoyed my time spent in Tethe'ala and Silverant. And I've been there. Those are places that I have, in many regards, been. So I also actually really appreciate some of the Assassin's Creed games and the way that they give you a chance to kind of think about the settings of places differently as well. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. So until next time, everyone, you can contact me directly at sientir@gmail.com. You can like me on Facebook at facebook.com/sientirsramblers. And you can support me financially at patreon.com/sientir. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.